Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. In conversation yesterday, I talked to someone, and they said that they had heard from a friend that someone was offered, and this is the Midwest, but $25 an hour, and you say, oh my gosh, what are the chains doing now? But this was for a hospital inpatient position. So that really changes the dynamic completely. And again, I want to mention this not because the sky is falling. You can go to Cedar Rapids, which is a northeastern part of my state, and get a good salary. They're looking for a pharmacy manager there. You can go to rural hospitals there are many rural hospitals in Arizona that I know of that are really looking and that pay well, and so forth. So, but what this does is it completely changes the dynamic of what's going to happen with residencies. So let's start thinking about the economics of it. And I know most of you had to take economics. You kind of dismissed it, or you said, all right, I got it. Supply, demand, I'm good. We just make a curve and we know what's going on. So let's start kind of going through the process. So if the starting salary of someone in an inpatient pharmacy is the same as a residency and offers permanence versus non-permanence, so a residency, of course, is a one-year position, and you don't necessarily know what's going to happen after. It certainly qualifies you for PGY2, but that's an application, and you may know in October if you're somebody that has the situation where they take their own before they put it out to the world. So the first thing is that a lot of thinking was, well, there's no way I can do a residency because I can't afford to do a residency. That just doesn't pay as well as the other job. Well, so the thought experiment now is, what if the job and the residency pay the same? How does that change? Well, it doesn't really, because a $25 an hour inpatient hospital job is a 40-hour job. You work 40 hours. A residency that pays $50,000 could be 60 hours a week, and it could be erratic schedules, and it could be on call, and it could be all these other things. And you say, well, why would somebody take that? Well, if you're thinking that you may be flying free, single, not really have someone else that you're matching up with, and you can go about the country, and so this doesn't maybe apply to you as much. But if you are place-bound, as I was, or I am, and you have a spouse and children that are in schools, or you have a situation where you can't move, all of a sudden, what matters more is the permanency of the position rather than the salary of the position. So what is this going to do to the competitiveness for residencies in the fall? Well, if the gap between somebody who gets a residency and someone who gets a traditional job continues to shrink, then that whole I'm not doing a residency because of the money goes away. The other thing is that some jobs are only open to those who have a residency, and that's kind of what we're seeing right now is a lot of frustration with the new graduates who are applying for jobs or want certain jobs, and they're saying, you need a pharmacist, I'm a pharmacist, and the job says, no, you're not qualified, you don't have PGY1, you don't have PGY2, you have no experience managing, you've only been a technician for a couple of years, we need somebody that has a couple of years experience, we don't want to put you in a busy store. And so the frustration on the hiring end is that you've been prepared to go to a residency when what they need is somebody that can, from out of the gate, manage a group of people. So you're in much better shape if you have that kind of experience, maybe in your past. Maybe you were an assistant manager at a restaurant, or maybe you were an assistant manager at a chain or something like that. So here are kind of the things that might or might not happen, and I know 85 students at least will be going to Chicago this week, I think it is, or next week. AACP meets in Chicago. And your mentors are there, and I would ask them this question. Hey, what would you do if you lost your job or couldn't get a job in the area? And I don't mean this in a spiteful way. I actually mean it in the opposite. I think you're going to learn a lot more about them. I think a lot of times students look at the professor and say, oh man, this guy's really smart. He must have just gone to pharmacy school, been Rokai, gotten the residency they wanted, gone to the PGY2 they wanted, and then they said, I really want to get a clinical job in a pharmacy school here, and they got it exactly where they wanted it, when it is exactly the opposite. So I think it would start a conversation outside of the clinical conversation. Certainly they mentor you on posters and things like that, but I think being mentored now on career is really important thing. So I know that there are those 85 Walmart scholars. I think it would be really important that you start that conversation, especially since I think you have some like dinner or something like that where you get to kind of socialize with them. But this is the thing that's going to happen in fall. So as people are hearing that some people aren't getting jobs or some people are getting less jobs, all of a sudden they're going from I wasn't considering a residency to I am considering a residency, which means that if where you go with they've been getting about 300 new residencies a year. And if that pace continues, but we have this kind of exponential push, it's going to be that much harder to get one. And before I talk all doom and gloom, I'm going to also talk about the opposite that's going to happen. So if you have that projection, that means that there's going to be a large group of people that were planning to get a position with the current company that they're in, whether they're at an independent or chain, because chains represent, I think it's chains 2/3, hospital 1/3 if you want to do like back of the napkin math. And so if those positions aren't there, then this is going to be the first class that got to see a class in front of it struggle with community positions. And so they're going to start really seriously considering residency. So the pool for those programs should rise. The other consideration is that those that were thinking, well, I'll just do my 2 years and come back and get a job, those people might actually do the opposite and say, now that the salary really isn't much different than what I could get with my bachelor's degree or master's degree, whatever you had going in, I think I'm going to, start thinking that way. And so what would I have done if I was in this position right now? So my undergraduate degree, I only had an AA coming from the University of Florida. And I had experience working, I worked at Wendy's, I worked at Pizzeria Uno's, and I'd been offered assistant management positions, but I turned them down. I think the first thing I would have done would have gotten an assistant manager position in a restaurant. And that's my choice. That's something that I enjoyed. It's not that I'm not trying to bring in the drive-through comparison. Rather, I enjoyed a service position. I enjoyed that, it was kind of an evening thing. It was a lot of contact with people. I am an extrovert and I get fuel when I'm around people, and I really struggle when I'm alone too long. So I would have made sure to get paid for those positions. I wouldn't have said, okay, well, I need to get an MBA in management so I can become a restaurant manager. I would have done the exact opposite. I would have said, hey, I'm interested in some more responsibility. I'd want to see if I could start on the management program or maybe bartending, something like that. And so that I started to better understand the back of the house, the front of the house, so that maybe I would have a career as a restaurant manager or something like that. Because I really did enjoy being around that group. Now it is incredibly difficult because the job market is so good for wait staff and for things like that it's incredibly difficult to get people. So as a manager, the manager part would be easy, I think, in terms of making a transition in a leadership role in pharmacy to a leadership role in a restaurant. But what would be really hard is learning to hire and keep people and keeping an environment where they're going to be successful, because, on days that it rained, we didn't make much money at all, if anything, if it was too hot. And so we were very weather dependent. It's also seasonal. The travel was completely different in Baltimore in certain parts of the year than it was in other parts of the year. But what I would do is, and I'm going to separate you into two groups. There's the group that did biology, chemistry as an undergrad, and then there's the groups that did something different. So I was an English major undergrad, and I finished my degree many years later. And so I would have begun looking at writing for sure as a side hustle. But if I was in this position, I would have gone to school during the day to get a teacher credential, and I would have worked at night at the restaurants. And remember, I was in my mid-20s, and again, my debt structure was a little bit different. I remember that I was not sure if I was going to continue to my P3 year because I owed $11,000. And it was going to go all the way up to, I think, $10,000 a year that I was going to be, or almost $12,000 a year I was going to be taking out. And that was a big jump for me. And I was, looking at the math and saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to pay $40,000 back when salaries were around 60, 65,000 is what we were making. But 25,000 a year works out to, 25 times 40 times 52 makes around 50,000 or 52, something like that. And so if you're looking at salaries that are 25, 35, somewhere around that range, which is, I think, I don't know, I just keep seeing the number 30 going around, but I don't know where that's coming from. But I keep seeing that these numbers are going to be around there. So you're thinking about $50,000, $60,000. And you say, well, this is ridiculous. How in the world could somebody who went to school for this many years, make that much money? But let's think about what the degree actually is. So those of you that went to undergrad and got a 4-year degree, that's a completely different entity than what is required to get the degree. So when I went, I missed the bachelor's by 1 year. So I would have gone 2 years undergrad and 3 years in pharmacy school, which was just 300, 400, and 500 level courses. All the school did was add a year. So it's bachelor's plus 2, which in any other circumstance in graduate school, and we're in professional school in pharmacy, not graduate school. In graduate school, bachelor's plus 2 is a master's. The reason the doctorate came out was the same reason it's in law as Juris Doctor, the same reason it's in PT, is because they wanted to make clear that it was a terminal program. And you can have master's programs that are terminal, but because they already had the PharmD, they simply kept it. If it was a PA, then you don't want to do that because that's a conflict. You don't want to have, well, you see, this is the PA doctor and then this is the physician doctor. That doesn't really make sense in a relationship. So if you think about what it is, pharmacy is really 2 plus 4. It's not 4 plus 2 plus 5. So when you talk about a PhD, it's 4 undergrad, 2 masters, 5 PhD. So you're talking, 5 plus 2 makes 7, 7 plus 4 makes 11. You're talking 11 years of school to get your doctorate. It's possible now, especially if you went to high school and took some of the classes, to get it in 4 and get a doctorate, or 5 if you go to a 3-year program. So I just want to get you, especially those APPE students that are in their 4th year, especially those PGY1 students that are in their 1st year of residency, to get out of your head that in some way your schooling equals your salary. The way that it works is a company looks at 2 numbers, and they look at a bottom number that says no one will get too few applicants for this position, they won't be qualified. And you'll look at an upper number, which is we're getting too many applicants, we've obviously overshot the mark. And let me give you an analogy. Imagine if instead of giving the person that takes care of our kids $400 a week for 4 hours, imagine if we were offering $4,000 a week, okay, which is about $200,000 a year, something like that. Imagine that. How many applications would we get for that position? People would be calling from out of state. People would move here for that position. Okay? So it's the same thing here. What you're getting your salary on is somewhere between where a person would not leave the position for a while, they at least retain the person for a while, but also not overshoot. And what we're going to see is that that number is coming way down really fast. And there's another misconception that the way that it went up is the way that it goes down. And for those of you that were there in, 2006, 2007, 2008, you watched prices for houses creep up for years and years and years and then plummet. I watched my Arizona house go from, and this is a good example. In 1997, I bought a 2-bedroom condo for $93,000. And I watched it at the height of the market balloon up to $200,000. And then from that 200,000, I watched it go to 60. So, and then it's come back up to 150 or something like that. So the expectation that we're going to have this nice curve, well, salaries have gone up for a while, they're going to go down a little bit, is incorrect. It's actually going to plummet. It's going to just go off a cliff. And you say, okay, well, there's going to be fewer students graduating. The data doesn't support that. The data supports that Pharmcast has, for the last 4 years, had around 13,000 accepted applicants, and the percentages have gone from 77 to 83 or something like that in terms of acceptance rates. We have no idea what's going to happen this fall. They may have the preliminary data at the meeting this week. I just know that they've lost around 4 to 5% of the applicant pool that maybe they had last year, which is not a ton. So the applicants are not necessarily going down, and the number of people graduating is not going to go down anytime soon. You say, well, certainly pharmacy students are going to leave if they're going to hear all this bad news. That's not the case. There's a principle that was studied very closely where basically what they would do is they would take someone and they would say, do these lines look the same? Say, no, this one's much bigger than the other. And then they would bring in one person, and then 2 persons, and then 3, and then so forth. And at around 3 or 4 people, these people were actors, they would say, no, those lines are the same. And then that person would start changing their mind. So the people that are in school right now are going to stay in school. Although the attrition rate has gone from close to 1% or 2%, closer to 11%, I just don't see a mass exodus because there really isn't. That's just not what people do. It just doesn't happen that way. So that's not going to happen. So you're going to see graduation rates around the same as what they were. And we just had a new pharmacy school come in, Southern California, just another one just started, and it's a 3-year program, so they'll get their people graduated really quick. And they just got candidate status with the last report in June from ACPE from June. So the ACPE said, no problem. You guys have enough. You have these deficiencies, but we'll make you a candidate. You just need to fix those deficiencies as you work towards graduating your first class, so you can move from pre-candidate to candidate status, right? And then candidate to accredited. So I would, if you can, some of you are going to be starting school here in July. I know many of you start in the midsummer, and have the conversation with the professors or the people that are at school and just say, hey, what would you do? And I think you're going to find answers that you were not expecting. I think you're going to find that these are very resilient, very capable, very amazing people, because it is incredibly difficult to get an academic position. And it is incredibly difficult to get tenure and to do that research and to get outside funding. You have to be the best of both. You have to be able to communicate with people outside and articulate the value of your work, and you have to work, and you have to be a good teacher, and all these different things. So lean into your mentors there at school. I think they're going to be able to give you a lot more than the clinical knowledge that you have. I think they're so valuable for getting some life knowledge. And I'm really curious to see what they're going to do in Chicago, because they do have a half-hour program where they're going to tell them what the job market is like. out there. And the admissions group, which is a totally different thing. The admissions people go to this kind of separate little mini conference beforehand and kind of talk about projections and how to deal with the numbers and all of that stuff and how to use Pharmcast and so forth. I think you're going to see a unification within the school where it was the job of the admissions committee to, take care of bringing students in and answering their questions. And I'm a professor, I'll show up and, do a couple interviews, and then my responsibility is done. I think that the schools that will survive this, it is really a catastrophe, will survive this are the ones that are unified under one banner, that it's not my job, it's not your job, it's our responsibility to help all of these students succeed. Now, the last point I wanted to make was what's going on with the current graduates. And that's something that most people don't think about. And there isn't a system right now to deal with that. And I think that that is the most important thing that we can possibly do. Aside from reading Dr. Richard Waite's report on Medium, which is amazing. So if you look it up, it's about the Walmart layoffs, and it is the most articulate, the best written, not so insightful report into what's going on and what you can do. Definitely go to Dr. Richard Waite's post on Medium. But I think that now more than ever, you're going to have to. It's so completely different than what I think you thought it was going to be like. And I think that it's going to be time that these conversations happen in the classroom. It's no longer acceptable to say, okay, well, we're going to all separate, and the graduating class, they graduated, we don't communicate with them. It needs to be the exact opposite. It needs to be, I need to know where every single student is and what their level of success is and what they need from us. So when I'm with my children and we're at, let's say, Adventureland or something like that, I'm always going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2. Where's the other one? Where's number 3? Or where are the other 2? Where did they go? I'm always knowing at every moment exactly where they are. At graduation, and a number of graduations are doing this, you'll hear where a person is going to residency. That's a very clear, easy thing. It happened in March, or in the post-match or whatever it is, the no longer scramble match 2. There was time to put those in. A couple of people had positions, but what schools need to do now is they need to talk to the people that are graduated and find out how are things going. And they're going to find from some of them, oh, it was great. I was really worried for a while there, but this particular connection got me this particular job. All is well. Things are going well. On the other hand, there's another group where the call that would go out would be, well, how are you doing? It's like, well, I don't have a position. Well, what are you looking towards? And it's like, well, I have to stay in town. I can't get a position. I have this responsibility to my family that I can't get a position in the place that I'm at. Okay? And so then the conversation needs to be, well, what can we do to support you? And that's when those schools with the strong alumni networks need to start coming out, and we need to start connecting again. So the way that pharmacy school is set up right now cannot be the way that it is during this, because you take a group of cohesive people for 3 years and you separate them. You bring them together for a day for graduation and then they're gone. It can't be like that. You need to bring them back together. So two of the most successful pharmacists in terms of getting exactly what they wanted when they graduated actually were held back a year. And during that year, they worked on very specific goals that were sort of pharmacy related, but really related to their passions. And then it came to fruition in that it became pharmacy related. You really need to find out what's going on with those people and the schools need to reach out. So you ask, what should they be talking about this weekend or this week as they go into Chicago? Every pharmacy school needs to know exactly how every graduate is doing and needs to ask them, what can I do to help you? Because there are a lot of people that would not reach out, but could really benefit from a number of the things that a pharmacy school can provide, especially when it comes to those that are established and have alumni networks. But I think it's high time that we really, really reach out to those people that are out there, because no one really knows. Like, people are like, well, what's the job market like? Well, there's no data on that. The pharmacist manpower hasn't updated since fourth quarter last year, and we're in third quarter this year. So I think it's important that we start building the communities with those new graduates and start working with those new graduates to help them get employed in pharmacy or anywhere, because loans are coming due in November for the first group, and then January 1st for the PGY1s. So anyway, as always, reach out to me. I know I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent, but I just want to make clear that the job, your expectation that the amount of work that you put into a degree equates to a certain salary is simply not true. It's a fiction. What really happens is that an employer looks at the supply of people for that position, and looks at the demand for the position, and tries to get a number that isn't too low and isn't too high. But it has absolutely nothing to do with your credential. And that's how it's always been. We've never been a meritocracy in pharmacy. We've always been a supply-demand position, and we're getting hit pretty hard right now. So I'm always happy to talk to anybody, aaguerra@dmac.edu, or you can always hit me up on Facebook Messenger.
Support for this episode comes from the audiobook Memorizing Pharmacology, a relaxed approach. With over 9,000 sales in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, it's the go-to resource to ease the pharmacology challenge. Available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com, in print, ebook, and audiobook. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.